started, so welcome. Just a couple more people milling in there. Lots of seats. Amazing. Awesome. Thank you very much for coming. I'd like to welcome everyone to tonight's forum on the health risks to our community from the Portland's gas plant. My name is Corey Helm, and I'm a longtime resident of the East End of Toronto and a member of the Toronto East Residents for Renewable Energy Coalition. We are a coalition of local residents and climate groups working to phase out the plant and power up renewables in Toronto. We'll talk more about that after. As we begin tonight's meeting, I would like to respectfully acknowledge that this is the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. Today, this land is home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island. We gather with gratitude and thank Indigenous peoples for caring for this land since time immemorial and for sharing this land with those of us who are newcomers and settlers. Out of gratitude, we are called to treat the land, its plants, animals, stories, and its people with honor and respect. So before we move on to our speakers and the rest of our evening, I just want to share a couple quick notes for you. We are recording tonight's event, and the videos will be posted later on our website and socials, and we'll send out a link. Our program tonight will include several speakers, followed by a question and answer period. So we ask that you hold your questions until after all of the speakers. There are also information tables at the back of the room with lots of great info and resources from several climate and health organizations. So we invite you to visit them at the end of the evening if you haven't already. A few housekeeping notes. The washrooms are at the back, out those doors, so whenever you need. And there's some water out in the hallway. And the emergency exits are lit up by the green signs. So I just want to give a little bit of background about the Portland's Energy Center. The Portland's Energy Center, also known as PEC, P-E-C, is located about 2 kilometers south of us on Unwin Avenue. It's owned by Ontario Power Generation, and it's operated by TERRE Power. At the plant, natural gas, more appropriately known as fossil gas or methane gas, is burned to generate electricity. PEC was originally supposed to operate for a few hours a day to provide power during peak electricity demand. Last year, it operated on average for 14 hours a day, with some days operating up to 21 hours. In addition to this overall trend of heavier reliance on electricity from PEC, the Ontario government wants to expand the plant's generating capacity by another 50 megawatts. The Portland's plant is already Toronto's largest emitter of harmful greenhouse gases, the pollutants responsible for our climate crisis. It is also Toronto's largest emitter of nitrogen oxides, which we'll hear about later as some of the pollutants harmful to human health. So TERRE Power recently conducted an environmental screening process of its current expansion plans. Despite hundreds of comments from the public raising concern about human health and environmental impacts, and the existence of numerous studies that show the health impacts of long-term exposure from methane gas pollution, TERRE has somehow concluded in its final screening report that there are no public concerns with its expansion. This brings us tonight where we will hear about the human health and planetary health impacts of methane gas electricity production. So thank you for coming to be here for part of this important discussion. So now I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Peter Tabbins. Peter has been the member of provincial, a round of applause. Before he even speaks, awesome. Peter has been the member of provincial parliament for Toronto Danforth for more than 15 years. His earlier roles as Greenpeace Canada's executive director and Jack Layton's climate senior advisor informs Peter's leadership today in Queen's Park. He served for 7 years as Toronto City Councillor, where he chaired the Board of Health and pioneered the city's energy efficiency office in Toronto. He is the opposition critic for energy and the climate crisis and has been a strong advocate for climate justice and renewable energy at Queen's Park.
Thank you. That was a very nice introduction. Thank you so much. Folks, it's wonderful to see all of you here this evening. It's a really important issue. I'm here with a wonderful panel. We've got a lot to say. I want to thank TERRE for the work they've done pulling together tonight's meeting and all the work they've done organizing. TERRE. This is my second environmental meeting of the week. I just want to note Claire Haxel here, who moderated our Monday night town hall on fighting climate change from home, and she wrangled politicians really well. So look at the video. You'll enjoy her work. So there are a few things about this plant, this environmental assessment, that are really striking to me. And I think it goes without saying the plant is bad news in terms of climate, and it's bad news in terms of air quality, and thus of health. But the first point in terms of any assessment of doing something that will increase air pollution is to ask, is this absolutely necessary? And you're a sympathetic audience. I don't think I have to move you over on this. But I'll note two bodies that put out reports within the last 2 years saying that in order to meet Ontario's power needs, you did not have to increase the number of power plants or increase the production from those power plants. And the first, and it's a shocker, is the Royal Bank of Canada. I know, Royal Bank, how bad can you get? And even they recognize that environmentally and economically, it is a bad move to ramp up gas-fired power. They did their study, they put it out, it's public, told the Premier about it. As you can imagine, he rushed to read it. And there's an outfit called the Electricity Distributors Association that represents all the local hydros around Ontario. So Toronto Hydro's in there, PUC in Peterborough. They did a similar study, different angle. They looked at the numbers and they said you could save about $1 billion and bring the power supply online much faster if you invested in efficiency and conservation. So any argument that we have to take even a minimal amount of health risk hits up against this rock. The expansion is utterly unnecessary. That's the reality. The second point I want to make, and this is something that used to come up for many of you who've been in the neighborhood for a little while, when we're fighting other bad proposals. As many of you will realize, we frequently are subjected to air inversions over the south end of this community. And that was a big issue. I used to live at Queen and Greenwood, and I had a panoramic view of the sewage treatment plant. People killed to get that view, let me tell you. And I would go out on a Saturday afternoon, heavy, muggy day, and you'd see the plume coming up from the plant, and it would hit a ceiling. It was invisible, but then it would travel along the ceiling, fall out over the community. When you're talking about impacts of pollutants in this community, if you're not taking into account that air inversion, I don't believe you're doing a thorough or honest study. And in Hamilton, 15 years ago, a study was done, and it was very clear that the air inversions increased the impact of air pollutants in the lower part of the city and protected people in the upper part of the city. We, my friends, are in the lower part of the city. Third point I want to make, impact on local high-rises and those high-rises to come. Again, in the early 80s, I was managing a housing co-op over at Dundas and River. 8 stories, not a gigantic building. But when the city was proposing building a garbage incinerator in the Portlands, a really big one of the things that we found out, and was a big issue, and we were not close to the plant, was that the plume would come in the windows of our apartments. As you are well aware, there are proposals to put about 20,000 people into the port area. Having that plume right by those buildings is a huge mistake. These are the things that have to be considered and are not being considered by TERRE and by the provincial government. There needs to be a better assessment, and frankly, the expansion must be stopped. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Peter. You got us going on the right track in terms of the things we need to think about, and let's keep moving. So our next speaker is Councillor Paula Fletcher. Paula has a long... service to Toronto Danforth residents, where she first became involved as a leader in the East End Parent Network and then elected as the TDSB trustee in 2000. She was elected as city councillor in 2003 and has served as councillor since. Paula is currently the Deputy Speaker of City Council and sits on numerous committees and boards, including the Executive Committee. A strong, progressive voice at City Hall, Paula is focused on creating affordable housing, improving public transit, and fighting the climate crisis, among many other municipal initiatives. Welcome, Paula.
Thank you.
Hey, Paula.
Thank you so much. It's so good to see you all here tonight. And the Ralph Thornton Center is just one of those places that's known for fantastic meetings like this. When you've got an issue, we come here and we talk about it and we organize. And this is a community that always organizes. So here we are tonight. I don't know how many of you were involved in the initial fight to stop the Portland's Energy Center on the waterfront. Just put your hand up if you were around at that time. There we go, thank you. And we had a couple of slogans. We had one called Breathe Much. That was the tagline for our campaign, Breathe Much, because we knew that this was going to be a plant that was not going to be good for the neighborhood, it was not going to be good for air quality, and that was a plant that they said was just going to be a peaker plant. It was only coming here just to run a few hours a day when we needed some cooling or we needed some heating. Don't worry about a thing. And now we find out that in 2023 it ran on average of 14 hours and 40 minutes a day. And during the summer last year, in 2023, it ran nearly 21 hours a day. That is not a peaker plant, that's just a plain old plant running in the neighborhood. So this was, we said at that time, it also had another name. The campaign was called Breathe Much. We were very active, we had lots of signs. It was Mayor Miller at that time and everyone was opposing that there. And then it also got a name, Mistake by the Lake. That's its other name. You probably have heard that already. Because what a mistake by the lake. Here we are starting to transform our Portlands with the new island. I don't call it Villiers anymore. I call it the new island because it's going to get an Indigenous name sometime in the fall to recognize the, yes, thank you. To recognize the Indigenous history and also placemaking, and as people say, you'd never know we were here. Well, now we're going to make sure everybody knows that Indigenous people were at the mouth of the Don and all along the waterfront. But that one is, as Peter says, that's slated in that zone for about 9,000 new units coming on stream within the next 10 years by 2030. And so here you are ramping up a terribly noxious, bad air quality plant right beside an area that the province is doing that, right beside an area that the province is also involved in with building all of this new housing and this new island. There is something, the juxtaposition of that is, well, it could only happen under a certain government. We know who that is. So at the same time as we're undertaking this incredible waterfront development, we also have moving from a peaker plant to a full service running every day plant and adding more, which is really quite something. The PEC rose from, as you probably already know, in 2017, 188,000 tons greenhouse gases to 618,000 in 2021. This is not right in our city. This is why we fought this plant to start with, because we knew, some of us knew, or some of us suspected, and that would be you, Peter, that it really would, once you have a plant, you're going to run it. So putting it there was the mistake by the lake. And this is a community that has fought incineration. It closed down the incinerator at Ashbridge's Bay Sewage Treatment Plant, and I think Joyce McLean, she's here tonight, she was part of the provincial government, the Bob Rae government. They did a few fantastic things, and that was one of them. They closed incineration down in the East End and went to beneficial use of biosolids. And that was great. Thank you, Joyce, for all your work on that. Not to mention Peter Tabbins and Jack and Marilyn, you know, we're a good fighting community, everybody together. But we could not stop the Portlands Energy Center. But just because we couldn't stop it doesn't mean that we shouldn't fight it at every turn. And I just want to thank all of you leaders now in the community that have picked up this baton the second time around to say this is bad for this community. Even more so now that we're having this large-scale development on the waterfront. And even beside, I have to tell you one funny story, because we had so many meetings with these guys, and somebody from TransCanada, because they were partners there at the time, said to me with a straight face, "It will be the most beautiful building on the whole waterfront." No, it's not. It's an ugly little box with a couple of stacks sitting beside the Hearn. And as you all might know, all of the switching of all the electricity in the city of Toronto passes through that zone between the Hearn and the shipping channel. Everything goes from east to west there. So one of the things that was said was just put it inside the Hearn. It's already there. It's a big building. It could actually, and Toronto Hydro had that position. Let's find a way to use the Hearn in a different way. Unfortunately, that didn't happen either. So I'm out of time, happy to talk about this, but so happy to see so many people out tonight. Phase 2, Portlands Energy Center 2.0, let's call it that, in our good community fight here in the East End. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Paula. All right, so our next speaker will be Dr. Millie Roy. Dr. Roy is a practicing physician and surgeon in the Greater Toronto Area. She is assistant professor at the University of Toronto, Faculty of Medicine. She serves as the Ontario Regional Co-Chair of Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment and is co-chair of the Ontario Climate Emergency Campaign. Millie has completed the Climate Reality Leadership Training, CAPES Advocacy for Medical Professionals program, and she's a Harvard Medicine Fellowship in Climate Health Organizing. She is a mother and a physician deeply concerned about the environment. Dr. Roy works increasingly in the intersectional space of planetary health as the need to act has become even more urgent. Welcome, Millie.
Thank you. Great, thank you, and just make sure everything's, well, it's a real pleasure to be here tonight, and I actually hail from the west end of the GTA, so it's wonderful to be visiting the East End.
Welcome to the East End.
And see the spirit that's obvious in the room here, so thank you so much. And I'm really pleased to speak to you about the health impacts of gas plants around this larger discussion of the Portlands Energy Center. And thank you to Corey for the introduction. I want to talk to you, start by acknowledging TERRE and the amazing work that you've been doing. This is a quote that's maybe a little bit overused, but I thought it was so apt for your group, and about the power of a small group of people to really change the world. So thank you for doing what you're doing, and looking forward to some good outcomes. So we'll dive right in. Thank you. I'm a little shorter than everybody else. So just a quick introduction, and then we'll talk about the health impacts of climate change and of air pollution, the results of burning the gas that burns at Portlands, and then try to narrow down a little bit more on the health impacts of the Portlands Energy Center itself, and then open it up for more discussion. Just a quick word on introducing the groups that I'm affiliated with. The Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment, or CAPE, is a non-profit physician-directed organization, and we try to work at the intersection of health and environment to secure health for all by protecting the environment. And we work with governments, with policy work, campaigns, education, research, and media, and more. And in the Ontario Climate Emergency Campaign, which is open to anybody in this room to join. It's a nonpartisan environmental democracy movement to promote awareness on environmental issues and to urge political leaders to sort of forward progressive climate action through our democratic voice. We have a coalition type of structure with multiple sectors represented, so youth groups, seniors groups, health groups, environmental groups, all across the board. Currently we have about 275 organizations on board, individuals, and representing around 850,000 Ontarians. So we hope to keep growing and use our voice together. And we work on collaborative actions centered around a scientific or science-based 12-point climate action plan. So let's look at the concept of planetary health. The idea that a healthy planet and healthy people are two sides of the same coin. So we can't have one without the other. And when we think about burning gas and how it harms human health, there's sort of two sides to that coin as well. So on the one side, we have carbon pollution when we burn gas, and that leads to greenhouse gas emissions and climate change. And on the other side, we have air pollution, what we're going to talk about as well in air quality, and that's by generating particulate matter and toxic gases, especially nitrogen oxides, and that's going to show up a little bit more in the talk. So let's look at the pathway of climate change first. Climate change is now recognized as the single greatest threat to human health of our time, and our very survival is at stake. And this quote comes directly from the World Health Organization. This poster is made by the Canadian Medical Association, and it tries to show the many different impacts of climate change right across the country, as you can see here. Let's delve into that a little bit. So for instance, extreme weather, and especially extreme heat. The 2021 BC heat dome has now become the single deadliest weather event in Canadian history, and 619 people perished in that heat event. And where there's heat, there's also fire. So planetary warming is fueling increasingly severe wildfires, which generate health risks of their own and further escalate carbon emissions. And of course, last year we saw the worst ever wildfire season in Canadian history, and this year we're already off to quite an ominous and early start. And then the climate crisis is also affecting housing and food security, and these are both social determinants of health for obvious reasons. Furthermore, about 60% of infectious diseases may actually be increased or worsened through climate change, which at the same time is increasing antibiotic resistance. And this is a great concern in the medical community. So already right here in Ontario, we've seen the rise of West Nile, Lyme, pandemics such as COVID. These are all made more probable with climate change. And in the near future, we may actually start to see diseases like malaria, dengue, yellow fever, which have never actually originated in these regions before. And there are also devastating mental health impacts of climate change, and unfortunately these are borne especially by our youth. Canadian studies have showed associations with depression, suicide. A massive global study of 10,000 youth recently showed high levels of daily climate anxiety. Youth who are hesitant to have children. And the majority of youth around the world currently feel that governments are betraying them and future generations. So this is our chance to try to get governments to do better. Let's turn to the other pathway we talked about now, which is air pollution. So first of all, let's understand a little bit about what's in air pollution. Of course, there are many, many more components than what I've listed here. But I've listed here the 4 primary or key components of air pollution that pose health risks. So these include particulate matter, ozone, which is ground level ozone, not what we think of up in the atmosphere, nitrogen dioxide, and sulfur dioxide. And I've highlighted the nitrogen dioxide because that is the key pollutant that is linked with Portland's. So how big is this problem of air pollution? Well, it turns out it's pretty big. Around the world, nearly 7 million people die every year prematurely, simply by breathing polluted air. And that translates to over 15,000 Canadians and nearly 7,000 Ontarians every year as well. And if we stack it up against other health risks around the world, it's the red bar at the very end. It stacks up pretty high, right up there with secondhand smoking. And in fact, about 1 in 5 premature deaths around the world is actually attributed to air pollution. So how does this happen? Let's look at the system-by-system impacts of what happens in our bodies when we are breathing polluted air. So I wanted to point out, first of all, an excellent report that was published by CAPE. It was called the Traffic-Related Air Pollution Report a couple of years ago, 2022. I provided a link if people want to look things up. And this was a synthesis of almost 1,200 scientific articles from around the world. And based on all of that information, it came up with summaries of health impacts, epidemiology, and equity, and made recommendations based on the findings. So when we are exposed to polluted air, when we breathe it in, the health harms occur primarily due to particulate matter, especially the smaller ones, which we call 2.5s, and nitrogen oxide gases. They pass to our lungs and then right across our lungs into our bloodstream, where they have access to the rest of our body and can cause disease in multiple parts of the body. So of course, we expect lung disease. So things like asthma and COPD are highly linked, also things like bronchitis, pneumonia, and so on. But it's also linked with heart disease. So things like heart attacks, irregular heartbeats, high blood pressure, and blood clots. A recent study showed that by taking young, healthy adolescents and having them breathe polluted air, within 2 hours, we're able to detect irregular heartbeats. So these are really concerning. We find we're much more sensitive to these impacts than we ever realized before. Let's carry on. There are impacts in the brain, things like stroke, dementia, ADHD, and more. Again, another very well done study, what we call systemic review and meta-analysis, or the highest level of research we can do, shows that even a small increase in pollution in our air raises the risk for dementia. The endocrine system is affected. So just by breathing polluted air, we can develop diabetes and obesity. And it is definitely linked with multiple cancers, most strongly lung, leukemia, and breast, but others as well. And air pollution poses serious health harms to pregnant women and babies, including low birth weight, prematurity, stillbirths, and birth defects. It is also known to increase the impact of COVID-19 in terms of transmission, susceptibility, and death. The COVID virus actually sort of hitches a ride with particulate matter when we breathe in polluted air, gets down into our lungs, and lungs that have been breathing polluted air are already inflamed and more susceptible to becoming infected. So it's a whole chain of events. And air pollution is an independent risk factor, so independent of climate change, it is also increasing antibiotic resistance, and it is also linked with mental health impacts, including depression and suicide. Again, with very strong, well-done research. So that's a lot. In terms of equity, there are equity issues here as well. So around the world, about 99% of people actually breathe air that does not meet the latest WHO standards for non-polluted air. And the WHO sort of increased or made their standards more stringent a couple of years ago, about 2021. And of the over 4 million deaths that occur every year due to outdoor air pollution, the remainder being indoor pollution, about 91% occur in low and middle income countries. So at least we're lucky, we're very lucky there to be in Canada. But even here in Canada, there are definite equity issues. Lower socioeconomic status is linked to higher air pollution exposure, higher health risks, and yet greater barriers to accessing healthcare when it's needed. And in the US literature, the same trends are shown for racialized persons, although in Canada that research just hasn't been done yet. We know that increased levels of, for instance, traffic-related air pollution occur within about a half a kilometer of major roads. And in fact, 1 in 3 Canadians live within even half that distance, about 250 meters. So this is sort of a backdrop of what we're already dealing with in terms of the burden of air pollution on our bodies. And then, let's try to look at the health impacts of nitrogen dioxide and try to tease that out a little bit from the other pollutants. It's very difficult to do, but I'll try to present to you a little bit about what we know. First of all, nitrogen dioxide is produced primarily by burning fossil fuels, so that can be coal, it can be oil, and definitely it can be methane or fossil gas, what's being burned at Portlands. And when we are exposed to this NO2, once it hits our lungs, any moisture will actually convert it into acids, so it turns into nitric and nitrous acids, which actually start to inflame and damage our lung cells. It also generates free radicals, which attack our DNA and cause mutations. And this can lead to autoimmune and inflammatory diseases. And it affects the function of some of our immune cells, such as macrophages, which increase our risk of infections. So symptoms of NO2 exposure, most typically the average person might encounter low levels when it comes to breathing or just air, and that would be things like coughing, wheezing, shortness of breath, lung spasms and swelling, which sort of cross over into asthma. But at higher levels, it can cause burning, throat swelling, upper airway obstruction, and even be fatal. With chronic exposure, one of the strongest links is with children developing respiratory infections and asthma, and some of these can develop into permanent restrictive or obstructive lung diseases. So in terms of, if we try to make a list of, as I said, sort of trying to tease out the health impacts of NO2, try to separate it from particulate matter, you'll see the list here overlaps quite a bit with the list I showed you for air pollution in general, but we know that just with exposure to NO2, there's definite links with lung and heart disease. It can not only trigger asthma, but it's felt that in children it may actually be able to cause asthma. The strongest link is with COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and including fatal cases of this. It can also cause Alzheimer's, cancers, increased infection risk, as we mentioned, the risk to pregnancy and birth outcomes, and it's been shown to increase emergency room and hospital admissions, and of course is linked in isolation as a single pollutant with premature death. So what is a safe level of exposure given all of this information? Well, as I've been mentioning, as we learn more about the risks of exposure, the guidelines have become more and more stringent. Yeah. So the current WHO guidelines suggest a maximum exposure in a 1-day period of 25 micrograms per cubic meter of air, or sort of sustained annual exposure of no more than 10 micrograms per cubic meter of air. But in reality, or in fact, what we recognize is that NO2 does not actually have a safe exposure limit. We really are sensitive to any level. So let's now look at the health impacts of Portlands. First of all, there's a history of poor local air quality here, as Peter so well described. Air quality in South Riverdale has been an ongoing issue for years, routinely exceeding the recommended NO2 exposure limits, and these are even the older limits that were not so stringent. A study was done back in 2012, and it suggested that a significant portion of air pollution, in fact, was arising from other sources, such as vehicles, buildings, and so on. But it also identified hotspots of poor air quality that were clearly being caused by large local industrial polluting sources, such as Portlands. And I'm sorry if you can't all make out sort of the map that I've shown there, but what that is meant to show were the annual NO2 concentrations back in 2012. And in fact, I know you can't read the numbers, but all of the zones, right from the white to the black, in today's sort of standards, would in fact exceed the allowable concentrations. This is information taken from the National Pollutants Release Inventory, and again, sorry, it's a bit of a busy chart, but it's meant to show you that, first of all, NO2 is the main pollutant released by Portland's. It is the area's largest single emitter of NO2, and it accounts for nearly all the local industrial NO2 emissions in this area. And the emissions from Portland's for NO2 have more than doubled over a decade. So this chart here shows you that by about a factor of 5, so City of Toronto is sort of the next biggest polluter, and you can see it was at about 54.5, and Portland's was at 250 tons. So it stands out. And this next chart shows us that in 2013, I put a little yellow box to show you that the output from Portland's was 218 tons, and in 2022 that went up to 509. So it more than doubled. Air quality modeling, again, Peter talked about the air inversions and plumes and all of this, and that's exactly right. I wanted to point out that the 2012 air quality report suggested that NO2 from PEC was mainly going to be a health risk at elevations of over 30 stories. But first of all, it's important to know that data relevant to the modeling, such as the frequency of starts and stops of the gas plant, were not provided by Portland's to the authors or the researchers, and that limited the modeling accuracy by making assumptions in lieu. And since the report, as we've heard, the recommended exposure limits are now much, much lower, and at the same time, the outputs of NO2 have more than doubled. So, yeah, so when we put this all together, as well with the fact that air quality modeling is notoriously variable. It depends on at least 3 different things: the actual pollutant amount and type, but also wind characteristics, which are constantly in flux, physical characteristics of the environment in question. So all factors considered, the risks due to NO2 exposure have definitely increased at closer to ground level since the 2012 report, but it is very difficult to calculate the exact ground level threat that is posed, but we know it's there. And as the science, so just to conclude, as the science of air pollution has grown then, we're learning we're more susceptible than we ever realized before to the health risks of this pollutant. There is no safe exposure limit. The catchment area around Portland's already has unacceptable levels of air pollution. And as we heard, Portland's is the largest emitter, has recently doubled its output. And as well, we need to remember it is also the single largest greenhouse gas emitter. So again, that other pathway to health harm through carbon pollution. So PEC and TERRE must be held accountable as well for the entire life cycle of the gas that's burned at Portland's, including the known massive gas leaks and health harms that are inherent in the entire process, right from the fracking at source to distribution and delivery at destination. They must also be held accountable for the associated carbon pollution, which of course includes highly potent methane gas, which is 80 to 85 times stronger as a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide, which is driving planetary warming well beyond this neighborhood as well. And I think that strengthens the argument that you can make from within this neighborhood. So as directed twice by the City of Toronto, Portland should be urgently phasing out harmful gas-fired electricity to be replaced with renewables. This will yield huge co-benefits for public health, lower the costs, and critically necessary environmental protections. So I'll conclude with just a little thought that the energy choices we make to power our homes, movements, and lives today are critical to a healthy, sustainable, livable future for all. And the graphic that I've shared on the left side here, I had the pleasure of visiting a graduate student exhibition of young urban design students at a regional college. And I was just blown away by the work that I saw there and the future that is imagined, the hope, the inspiration, and the really bright minds who are coming up with all of these. And that graphic was actually the award winner. It was hand-drawn. And there's so much that we can be, but we have to be there for this next generation to give them the chance and the opportunity to do that work that ultimately is going to benefit all of us. So just a final word from the Canadian Public Health Association to remind us that we are running out of time to do this. We're the final generation with the opportunity to avoid catastrophic climate change, which we need to treat like the public health emergency that it is. But this is our moment of greatest opportunity. So thank you all.
So, thank you very much, Dr. Roy. And on behalf of the organizers, I would like to thank very much Dr. Roy. I'd give her another round of applause. For sharing all this crucial information that we need to address these very big issues. And there's a lot of information you've given us tonight, and it's a lot of food for thought for everybody here. My name is Brian Champ, and I'm a member of Toronto East Residents for Renewable Energy, TERRE, that has put on this forum tonight. And we are local residents and groups concerned about the plans of TERRE Power, which operates PEC, to install new turbines this fall in the plant just south of here, which basically will extend the life of the plant. And it's been opposed by Toronto City Council as well as many other groups. And as has been mentioned before, the plant was only supposed to be a peaker plant originally, but last summer operated it up to 21 hours a day, which is a bait and switch of a large variety. Its expansion and extension is part of a province-wide gas-fired electricity expansion driven by the Ford government. They have proposed new plants to be built in places across Ontario, many of which have been rejected by town councils, such as in Thorold, Halton Hills, and Loyalist Township, to name a few. So we are one of many communities' resistance to gas-fired electricity expansion across the province, and we're connected through some of the environmental groups that are such as Environmental Defence and Ontario Clean Air Alliance that have helped link some of these communities that struggle together. Now a little bit about TERRE. Where did we come from? Well, last November, really the start of TERRE was at a gas plant meeting that happened in this room last July, when I think Corey and I had a conversation at the end of the thing.
Thank you for doing that, yes.
And then, so in early November, we organized a rally and march to raise awareness of the problem and advocate for solutions. And we are committed to mobilizing people who live, work, and go to school in the community to continue this important work. Excuse me. Global climate scientists continue to raise the alarm about the rapidly developing global climate crisis and the need to phase out fossil fuels, but the Ontario government is driving in the wrong direction. TERRE has engaged in the provincial public consultation process that TERRE Power is obligated to follow. As part of this, TERRE produced a screening report that is intended to evaluate the environmental and community health risks associated with the continued operation of the plant, but it is a report that is completely inadequate. We submitted a response to TERRE, the independent electricity system operator, and the Ministry of the Environment, highlighting the following concerns and demands. The necessity for TERRE to provide a comprehensive and up-to-date assessment of the health and environmental impacts of the project, particularly in the context of local and global climate change. Inadequate public consultation that failed to address the concerns of local residents and representative groups. Unmet provincial regulatory requirements and lack of consideration of social economic impacts and the lack of municipal support for the project. Our submission was endorsed by 19 local community and environmental groups and other organizations like the Ontario Clean Air Alliance, whose representatives in the room, and Environmental Defence have also submitted their own similar concerns and demands, as has the City of Toronto. But as well as the health and climate risks, expanding gas is also more costly. Investing in conservation and renewable energy production, since storage, solar, and wind are now the cheapest options. Future operating costs are also uncertain as gas prices are likely to rise going forward. So instead of what the government has on offer, we need a plan for a just transition to a low carbon economy that leaves no community or worker behind. Instead, this government continues to pursue policies that go in the opposite direction, exemplified by their canceling of more than 750 renewable projects at a cost of over $200 million when they first took office in 2018. Instead of this waste of money and continuing to pursue policies that mainly benefit companies such as Enbridge, Ontario could be funding this transition instead. This could include grants and subsidies for heat pump installation and energy efficiency retrofits for buildings, funding for building and community renewable energy infrastructure, developing a smart electricity grid that can manage electricity demand, improving and expanding public transit service to take cars off our gridlocked streets and highways. These changes would improve the livability of communities in the city and across the province. Now is the time for bold action to develop these alternatives. Waiting longer to act will make the transition more difficult and costlier. But thankfully, there is resistance to the province's environmentally destructive policies, including Ford's sell-off of the Greenbelt to developers was stopped by province-wide mobilizations and municipal pushback. And there is continuing opposition to Highway 413. Opposition to Bill 165, which unfortunately was just enacted, I believe, today. Passed at noon. But this is a new bill that overturned an Ontario Energy Board decision allowing Enbridge to build existing customers for new gas hookups, which only benefits Enbridge and developers. And part of that is the ongoing operating costs of a heat pump will be much less than the ongoing costs of heating your home by gas. But there's also opposition, as you see from my shirt. The Land Alliance of First Nations continues to oppose mining developments on Treaty 9 territory in Northern Ontario to save these rich peatlands that store a lot of carbon, and they're preserving them for the future generations. So what can people do? How can people get involved? Well, we do have an upcoming action we want to announce today. For some reason, the Portland's Energy Center is included in the doors open and shut. I don't know, I thought that was for heritage buildings or buildings of like some historical significance.
That was not very smart.
But anyway, so we're gonna go there. So please join TERRE on Saturday, May 25th between 12 noon and 2 p.m. at the entrance to the Portland's Energy Center. And if you sign up on our list, you'll get more information about this as we get closer to the date. We will be visibly sharing our demands to phase out gas and power up renewables at the entrance. And we will also have info leaflets, including questions that people can ask their tour guides about community health and the climate crisis as they go on the tours. But there are other ways to engage as well. People may have noticed sign-up lists when they came in. Please sign up on our list. You'll be informed about upcoming events and actions and so on. And there's also a little box you can tick if you'd like to get more involved, to join the organizing team and bring your creativity and energy to the campaign. We also, on our website, if you go to visit the TERRE table at the back, you can find the QR code for our website where there is an email, like a pattern email to be sent to the Ministry of Environment supporting the demands for what we've talked about today. Okay, so that's my submissions here. Now it's time for everybody here. So we'll now have time for everybody, if you've got questions that you'd like to address to any of the panelists today or members of TERRE, please indicate, raise your hand, and I will call on you. I can bring the wireless mic around. And so now is the time if you got questions.
Hi, my question's for Paula. Paula, as you know, the independent electricity system operator and Toronto Hydro and Hydro One are working together to develop an electricity plan for the city of Toronto right out to 2042. So I'm wondering if you can tell us what the city of Toronto is doing to persuade these three electricity organizations, including one which we own. What's the city going to do to persuade them to develop an electricity plan for Toronto that will phase out gas burning at Portlands and meet our future energy needs by energy efficiency and renewables, including rooftop solar in Toronto and wind power in Lake Ontario?
Good, we have to talk about that. Well, it's nice to see you, Jack, and you used to be on Toronto Hydro back Dan Leckie was the council. I know you're both on there, so you know a lot about this. I think that you may have noticed we had a by-election last year. Did you notice?
Yeah.
So we now have a new mayor, and I think our new mayor is much more focused on conservation and focused on a Toronto Hydro that is oriented in that direction. Toronto Hydro as a utility often says, well, we're a utility, we don't have to listen to what City Council says, despite the fact that we are the sole shareholder. But because they're a utility, they feel that they're quite special, and they do have a special role. But I think that you'll be seeing over the next while that there'll be a different fabric that will be coming to Toronto Hydro. There is a new CEO after how many years? I don't know if Anthony was there when you were on the board, Jeff. Was he there?
No. John Brooks back then.
Oh, yeah, John, but he came shortly after that. I think he's been there for 35 years and a long time. But we now have a new CEO. What's that?
Not quite 20.
Oh, not quite 20, but I'm sorry I'm on camera, okay. Anyway, there's a new CEO, a woman. I think it's the first time there's been a woman CEO of a major utility of this kind. She is from Calgary, don't hold that against her, but she ran all of the electricity in the city, I think when Nancy was mayor and also when Rachel Notley was the premier. So she is coming to Toronto, she's very highly regarded. It's going to be a new day overall for Hydro with the new CEO and also the new board of Hydro, which will be in place sometime early summer. So I think that there's been a lot of pressure on Toronto Hydro to step up for the environment and do things a little differently. It's been very difficult, but everything, the stars are aligned, as we say now. New mayor, new CEO, new board. And so this is the moment when we might actually see that direction, Jack. And I know you worked very hard for that all of your career. So I'm hoping that we can make all of that happen. Thank you.
Dr. Roy, thank you so much for that presentation. It was very dense, and I just was at a town hall with my MP last night. I mean, it was about affordability, but climate came up a little bit as well. I'm wondering if that presentation or parts of it could be shared either on the TERRE website or make it more possible for us to reuse it and take it to our other members, representatives. Thank you.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I will leave it to, I guess. Yeah, so absolutely, I will leave it to TERRE as to whether they'll be posting it on the website, but obviously it's being recorded. If there are any, requests, they can maybe be forwarded through TERRE. If any way that we can support, requests to amplify this information, absolutely, that's exactly what we're wanting to do. I think that one of the reasons, I'm so glad that TERRE thought to focus on health as a way to frame this issue, because the idea is for all of you, all of you are committed people, you're out here today. And trying to frame this with the lens of health is a way to try to make it less partisan, to depoliticize, and to connect it to issues that are compelling and maybe arguments that are a little bit more difficult to, to ignore if enough people are standing up and crying out for this. So that's certainly our hope at Cape.
Any other questions?
Thanks, TERRE, for organizing this, and I'm wondering, what is it that the Toronto City Council voted against this? Other city councils across Ontario have been successful at blocking plants, and I know Toronto gets special treatment from Doug Ford, but I'm just wondering, like, first of all, is there some sort of legal remedy here in terms of, I think Doug Ford said he would listen to the local communities when he was planning to expand.
Except for this site.
Except for this
Yes.
one, this was,
Yes, he's taken this out.
okay. And then the second thing is, if if the response to the initial environmental assessment is basically a rush off, which is what you were saying, Brian, is there potentially a legal way of stalling the project? Has anybody looked into, CELA, or what could be done to forestall the installation of these turbines?
Who wants to answer that?
And would you donate to that cause?
Well,
There's a donation box.
the second question is the easiest. Yeah, I would donate. I'm not aware of a clear legal path, and to some extent I'd ask Jack Gibbons, who's done more study of this, to comment. In terms of Doug Ford lying with every breath, kind of hard to nail him legally on that. I'm saying that into the camera. So don't expect his word to carry anywhere. As to other legal options, you'd have to have a lawyer take a look and give you an opinion. And folks, just to be honest with you, I'm not one.
Really?
I've been hiding it all these years. No, I'm not a lawyer.
That was more of a general question for everybody, not just for you.
No, I understand that, but I was the first one to give it a shot.
I just want to answer that fully because Stephen said, didn't council vote against it? You all have a sheet there, all the motions that we brought forward from the city. We don't run that one, it is provincial. But how come when Doug Ford said, if you don't want it, you don't have to have it? But you know how special we are here in Toronto. So he said, oh, everywhere else but here. So they've overridden that clause that a municipality that says they don't want it doesn't have to have it. So for Toronto, we said we don't want it, and he says, oh, but you still have to have it. So that's the special treatment that we're still getting here in the city of Toronto from our premier.
Boo.
We've heard that over 750 solar and wind contracts were canceled on Fort Canada Power. What's the status? So I understand that he's allowing them to happen again, and we know that the only way to reduce our gas needs is to build more renewables or to find other ways to meet our requirements. Also conservation and reducing demand. But what's the status now of the pipeline for renewable projects? And I know that's not just Toronto, but say in Ontario.
Again, I'm going to look to Jack Gibbons to correct me if I'm wrong. But the ones that they canceled, they killed. They're dead, decomposed, gone. They have put forward a plan saying they're going to ask for proposals for new renewable projects. But let's be honest, their focus right now is on gas. And so any project that came forward that might block gas, not going to be welcomed by that. They're structuring it so that gas is safe. Or sorry, the companies that want to build gas plants are safe in the assumption that they'll go ahead.
Why is gas the preferred energy source? What's going on?
Money.
Why? Is it just Enbridge lobbying?
Large companies with lots of money want to do things. And it's the way the province works. I'm not joking, that's the way it works.
Thanks. Just building on the previous question about the legal challenge, but if the city of Toronto has voted this down, the city has a massive legal department. Has the city's legal department been asked to examine legal options?
No, but we can. Haven't done that because we haven't done that. The legal option, once you exclude the city from municipality having a say, we know from Doug Ford, he reduced the city council, we went to the Supreme Court, and so we feel like that might not be that successful. So we'll just continue on here in opposing it. And community action is really important, especially in those ridings that have a government member. So if you look at that map, and I'm sure that our doctor here can give more information, that the impact of this plant as being the largest emitter in the GTA, it's not just here in east end of Toronto. So there is a mobilization that can take place about health impacts, and I certainly agree with you that health is such an important issue today that the health impacts of this type of pollution are one of the most compelling arguments not to proceed. And when we're talking about gas, there was an RFP, and Jack, you might know the answer here. IESO put out an RFP for battery storage. Does anybody, yes, Joyce knows about that. And we bid on this site in the Portlands, which would have been 200 megawatts, just of battery storage, because while we're talking about solar or wind, we're already making power. So storing it overnight, storing it to use is probably one of the most important things we can do. And I just want to salute Greg Allen, because decades ago, Greg Allen said, store power that's you're already making. And we got passed over for that. So that won't be happening down on Unwin Avenue, which would have been a good thing, because it may have counterbalanced the increase at the Portlands Energy Center. If you're going to store 200 megs there, why do you need to increase the capacity at Portland? So I just think Peter's right, and all roads lead to Rome, all roads lead to gas in this particular province with this particular government.
Thank you, Brian. Hi, Ingrid, and I'm a long time, well, my whole life I lived in the East End, anyway. Border Women's College Hospital, anyway. I went to Danforth Tech in the 90s, early 2000s, and I still in the East End. A lot of my friends have moved away, can't afford Toronto, blah, 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 blah. But one thing that I do, I'm a Bullfrog Power customer since 2008, and I only spend about $2.88 a month to take basically whatever energy that I use. Bullfrog Power puts it back in renewables like hydro, wind, solar, etc. I don't know if it's not a full solution to things, but it's very affordable. A cup of coffee a day, less than that, And also the other thing too is we could have voted out for it, but there is a low voter turnout in the last provincial election, and for just about every election. So, but it was just I remember election day, this is June 2022, I actually bawled my eyes out seeing the low voter turnout, and it's sickening because people made sacrifices. There's people in the world who want her storming down the doors to live in Toronto and Canada, and some people can't get their act together to go vote. Like, whatever, dudes, like, you want your cannabis? I don't do cannabis, but, yeah, go vote. Like, some people at Danforth Tech's like, well, I don't want to vote. It's like, oh, but they're going to, okay, all right, I'll vote then. Done, okay. Get all your neighbors and your aunties and uncles to vote, that's what I did. I'm trying my... No, I'm just kidding. No, but I really worked on some of my relatives to go vote. Anyway, my 2 cents.
Vote him out.
Thank you. Just looking around for other hands. Okay. I see one over there, but I think Alan's.
Yes, hello, I'm Alan Silverman from Seniors for Climate Action Now. And Dr. Roy and others have clearly indicated that this is not just another problem. This is a major problem. People are dying because of this Portland gas plant. So to me, there seems to be a little disconnect between the problem and the reaction to the problem. And so I am strongly encouraging City Council. There's a lot of brilliant people there. There must be some dramatic action that can be taken to first educate Torontonians as a whole, and to let the province know that we will not stand for this. Paula mentioned community engagement. That is fundamental, but we have politicians here who are on board. What are you proposing that's going to up the ante such that Doug Ford cannot just give us the finger?
Well, I guess I've seen the finger quite a few times. I don't know how hard that is, right? I think having seen the slideshow that you brought tonight, that one of the things I'm thinking is that this needs to come back to the Board of Health. And originally that 2012 study that you showed, that was the result of a motion that I brought when I was on the Board of Health to look at the health impacts of the Portland's Energy Center. And that was when we had a lot of, again, community engagement. So I think it's time to bring that back from the health side. And the chair, Councillor Moy, the vice chair, Councillor Bravo, I think that this is a place to do that, to start to talk about what you've just said, Alan, that this isn't just, oh, you're burning gas. This is so harmful for human health. And that's the route to get this back on the agenda in a major way, because it is the health impacts, and it is the public health impacts of burning gas and burning fossil fuels. Yeah. Thank you.
So mind if I give that a shot as well? What you've asked is a very substantial question, and my answer can only be partial, because the whole question was the strategy that will win and what will push it back. And I've watched a number of fights in the legislature now where we've had success. And the ones that were really big when Ford tried to suspend or use notwithstanding clauses related to the charter and his attack on education workers in the fall of 2022. I had a really good seat. I got thrown out of the legislature for calling me a liar. You tell the truth and you get thrown out, you lie and you continue to sit there. It's amazing to me. But what really happened there, and watching it, was unions across Ontario talked to their employers and said, this goes ahead, you're going to have trouble, and it's going to have an impact on your bottom line. That was never in the headlines, but that is what I picked up from talking around. So he actually got the message that he was going to cost a lot of big companies a lot of money. So if you can get organizations to hit those companies in some way so they catch Doug Ford's attention, that's useful. On the Greenbelt, there were a few things that allowed us to win, and it's quite correct to say people mobilizing out there was critical to winning. If people had not mobilized, and this is very important to say, in ridings outside of those held by the NDP and the Liberals and the Greens, they were hit in conservative ridings and that hurt them. And the other thing was being able to dig up enough evidence related to massage tables in Las Vegas or heavy drinking at wedding and bachelor parties that you could actually get the interest of the Integrity Commissioner, the Auditor General, and then the RCMP. Ultimately, when the RCMP said we're going to investigate you for this, that moved things. So I'm telling you that the level to catch his attention and move him is relatively high. In the end, he will move when he thinks he's politically threatened. And that means lose seats. And Jack back there has done some very interesting work, and I keep referring back, but he does extraordinary stuff. And one of the things, yes, yeah, I think it's right. I watched as Ontario Clean Air Alliance went out to cities and towns in Ontario to get them to pass resolutions against accepting gas plants. And that, very interesting to watch, caught their attention. They started attacking that in the legislature. So if we're going to think in a way that takes us to the road to success, it's not just a dramatic action, although they're very useful. And if you have photos of Doug Ford with an Enbridge executive on the side table, first of all, don't show me because it's too distressing. But secondly,
I have 500 of them.
but secondly, use them wisely. We've got to reach the people in other ridings who care about the cost of electricity and who care about asthma and the future of the children. And they're there across Ontario. Ontario Clean Air Alliance, Environmental Defense, I think Seniors for Climate Action now probably has an expanding network. We need to reach into those other communities and have them start to stand up, not just for their own community's immediate interest, but for the bigger interest of what's it going to cost us to have an electricity system that is not financially sustainable. I want to say to all of you, a number of years, 2018, 2017, Kathleen Wynne brought in a subsidy program for electricity rates because they were so high. People may well remember that. When Ford came in, he continued that program, but it has ramped up to many billions of dollars. It's $7 billion a year now. It is one of the largest programs in Ontario outside of health and education. Like the Ministry of Energy used to be this piddly little ministry, 300 million, 400 million a year. I mean, in my terms, that's astounding. But in terms of the other big players in the legislature, relatively small. When you start to talk $7 billion a year, you're talking about an impact on what the province can do in terms of a wide variety of services. And we need to talk to people about the fact that if you can't get autism services, it's in part because we have this massive bill that we're overpaying on electricity because of exactly the kind of deal that Ford's doing here. So we need to reach out to allies we haven't reached out to before and bring them on board. I apologize for rambling, Alan. Your question was excellent. There's a partial response on my part.
I think I have 4. I've got your hand. There's now 5.
Yeah. My name is Jared Irwin. I was going to ask Peter to maybe get up on his feet again because I have another question about the overall energy architecture in Ontario. We're massively committed to nuclear power. How are we ever going to make the investments into renewables and conservation if we have these massive outlays of capital from provincial, federal? And I just want to apologize for diverting attention a little bit from the gas issue, but we have to realize that the environmental racism is horrible in this country, and the impacts of uranium mining, nuclear waste disposals fall unevenly and traumatically on the First Nations of Ontario and the rest of Canada. So I'd like just a little bit of discussion on that.
You know, they all do tie together in the end. Because if you actually want an electricity system, an energy system that's affordable and sustainable, you actually have to have a process where you evaluate the options that come forward in terms of sustainability and cost, and then make a decision as to which one you're going to go with. That is not in place in Ontario right now. No decision is being made based on an analysis of the cost effectiveness of any option. That has to end, and I think people have to say, I want to see the numbers, I want to have the hearings. Because we have had situations in the past where Ontario has been about to embark on multi-hundred-billion-dollar projects for investment, on projects that made no sense, and they were killed once the numbers got out in the public. And I think, whether it's gas or any other form of generation, we need to have that public discussion of what's it going to cost, what am I going to get for it, and I think that would lead, frankly, first off, to a massive investment in energy efficiency and conservation. I mean, renewables are wonderful, I love them. Storage, wonderful, I love it. But the cheapest thing, and the best in terms of resilience and a lot of other things, is the conservation and efficiency. You got that, then you do the rest.
I'm just going to maybe add one little comment when we're talking about cost, which is, of course, you know, if we keep our math simple and just talk about the upfront energy costs, right away there's a huge savings. But if you add to that the extra costs in healthcare, because of the excessive burden of disease that's being created by the ongoing carbon and air pollution, again, the numbers become even more compelling. So I didn't have time to go over all the details in my slides, but for instance, even in the 2016 figures I showed for the impact of air pollution on health in Ontario, the impact back then was $49 billion. And that represented almost half the impact of the entire country. So in that year, the impact across Canada was $116 billion, but nearly half of that fell squarely in Ontario. So, you know, and the other thing is that we're missing the numbers. You know, we actually need research being done because, you know, without the numbers, we're in the dark here. But even working with what we have, you know, clearly, you know, the impacts on cost are so much greater when we actually look at the big picture and the whole picture, rather even than just sort of, you know, looking in one silo and just looking at energy costs. So just a little add there. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Diane. I'm kind of new to this immediate issue, but it's about time, thanks to a couple of friends. Is there any relevance, this is for Peter or Paula, to the immediate vicinity of Unwin? I mean, I know that this affects the whole city, the greater GTA, but is there any immediate relevance for Pinewood, for the film business? And Olivia was just in LA, right? Trying to work up. But, okay, trying to work up more business. I was just down there on the weekend, you know, had barbecue on Cherry Street. But is there any relevance, or is something like Pinewood a big user of energy?
I don't think there's a big relevance there. It's, Peter would know better. There's the Minister of Energy and then the Minister of Sport and Entertainment. I don't think the twain really meets.
They don't.
They don't meet.
Well, I guess as far though as the workers' health, I mean, people are inside the studio.
Yeah.
But it's, yeah.
Yeah, but last time I looked, they don't care too much about that. So it'll be very hard to get there, unless, of course, one of the accountability officers at the province wanted to look at this. The Auditor General could look at this, the cost of health, the cost of gas, putting that all together as expenditures. I don't know if anybody's done that or thought of that, but to me, that's one of those things that those accountability officers could tackle, which would help that.
Hi, sorry. There's been a lot of discussion earlier about the legal ramifications and if there were any legal actions involved, and it seems that from a legal action against the property, it's difficult to do. But we keep talking about holding the gas plant accountable, and if there are health effects as a result of this, are there legal actions against the gas plant for the health effects that they have produced, and are there any numbers that can be attached to that to show how people have been affected? So I'm wondering if there's a way of aligning the public health issue in numbers with an attack not to the government, but to the plant itself, because I think when it comes to that, if it's a bottom line issue, they'll pay attention.
Yeah, there's some work being done on suing companies for their climate change impact. But what you're saying makes a lot of sense. And I would recommend to TERRE to talk to Eco-Justice and just say, okay, this would be pioneering work, but we've got a situation where we already have an air pollution problem, and this plant is proposing to make it worse. What are the potential opportunities to go at them and claim a liability on their part for the damage to people's health? I think it's worth exploring. I don't know enough about the law, as I've already made a disclaimer, but talking to Eco-Justice, if anyone's smart enough to figure out where you can go on this, they are.
And you can help us. Join our committee.
Okay, I just wanted to let people know we've got, we were thinking we would wrap up about 8:30, but we can go a little bit over time. I've currently got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 names, and I'm not sure we're going to be able to get to everybody. If people could
Cut it off
leave
at
them.
5.
Yeah.
Cut it off at 5.
Oh, okay. So the questions have been answered.
Want to say something?
I will.
Brian? Millie just wanted to
Maybe while you're finding the next person, I'll just add a little bit to the question about legality. So one important piece of work actually that CAPE also has been involved in the last little while was the reform of CEPA, which is the Canadian Environmental Protection Act. So we now actually have legislated for the first time in Canadian history the right to a healthy environment, and it was never actually legislated before. And I have actually spoken, yes, so we have that now in our repertoire. But the problem is we don't have a legal precedent yet in applying that in sort of trying cases. So again, I'm not a lawyer either, but I know we were really excited. We had worked hard to make this reform happen, and when it was completed, I know I did speak to a few people from Eco-Justice actually, and they felt that they didn't have a lot to say on it just yet. But I just wanted people to be aware, and I think those are things that everyone needs to be aware of, because we need to start using these things to really make these demands, and our rights are being infringed upon in this way.
Thanks, everybody. I guess everybody who's already put their hands up, I will take your questions, but I think we're going to cut off the questions at this point.
Hi there. So, not a question, but a quick announcement. I'm from the Greater Toronto Health Coalition, and since it's a topical thing, considering that we're talking about the health effects. Okay, that's better. Since we're talking about health effects of air pollution and so on and so forth, one of the things that we're going to need is a strong healthcare system in order to deal with the unfortunate effects of this and everything else. And of course, Doug Ford is attacking healthcare at the same time as he's attacking everything else. And just to reinforce that people who are not aware, the Ontario Health Coalition has been doing organizing around opposing Doug Ford's attacks on public health care and trying to introduce a private system that is going to erode the public system even further. And we are organizing a demonstration for Thursday, May 30th at noon. And I'd encourage everybody here to come out if they possibly can. There are flyers on the table outside if people are not aware and want to get more information, or you can stop me and ask me for more info. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's George. I'm just a friend of someone brought me here. But battery storage was mentioned. I don't know what year that was in, but considering, and big money, companies with big money. Well, our province and the federal government invested a lot of money in batteries, and there are big companies involved. And battery storage seems like an idea that would be back on the table. I mean, give them something to do.
I'll say that I've talked to many of the battery companies because I was trying to get a sense of what was real and what wasn't. And currently, they're fairly happy with the contracts that are available to them, and it's highly unlikely they would engage in an attack on the gas companies. So I think you're right. There are players who will make money, and they will actually provide a useful service to us. But I wouldn't count on them to take on the gas companies. In fact, I'm sure they will not take on the gas companies.
Okay, thank you. I think there was someone back here that had their hand up. Did you have your hand up? It's okay. I just wanted to, before I take, there is one last question over here. I just wanted to bring everybody's attention to our partners who helped us organize today. So we have the Toronto Environmental Alliance, we have Solar Share, Seniors for Climate Action Now, South Woodvale Community Health Center, and of course the TERRE table is over here. And there's also additional, and you can also get your No More Gas Plant lawn signs and window signs if you're in a building. So I just wanted to encourage everybody in the period after the last question to browse those tables, get to meet some people out here, and don't forget to sign up on the TERRE list.
Okay.
This is partly in response to Alan's question about leverage of this information. We have a crisis, and I'm wondering, in terms of conveying the health impact evidence, are there committees, maybe Peter could help, my MPP is the health critic for the Liberal Party, Dr. Adosanji. And I think if you could raise this both with other critics as well as at committee, I don't know what committees would entertain a presentation such as you gave, Dr. Roy. So I guess I'm asking, how can we leverage this information better?
Well, I think as much as possible getting out to the public and making sure that people see that presentation, which was spectacular. I have to say that the provincial government is very different from the city government, where you actually have committees that have some independent life. All the committees at the province are on very short strings, and there's a puppet master. So there is no such thing as a committee with an independent chair who actually looks into things. It runs straight out of the Premier's office. Understand that, and then you'll understand that that is not going to be a venue to just have a chair say, we can do something. No, you asked a reasonable question, but you have to, having seen it in action, if there's a bill that's coming up, the Bill 165 on Enbridge and the attack on people's cost of living, President Terres were able to come to the committee and talk, but you won't have independent hearings as you would with the American Congress or Senate or with the City of Toronto. It really is profoundly centrally controlled.
We're just going to do, thank you Peter for that, a quick little wrap up. So thanks again to Millie, Paula, and Peter for sharing your experience and knowledge with us tonight, and for supporting TERRE and its community campaign. We really need your help, and we're going we need everyone's help, so we're going to continue to work together on this. I'd also like to say a huge thanks to TERRE's Health Forum Subcommittee for all of their hard work planning this event, and to all the volunteers who helped out tonight. So thank you everybody who behind the scenes did all the legwork for this. Also thanks to the of Ralph Thornton Center for their support. We also want to mention the groups that specifically supported this event, in particular Ontario Clean Air Alliance, Environmental Defence, and SCAN. Special thanks to Ontario Clean Air Alliance's local outreach team of volunteers, coordinated by Patrick, who is at the back, and Catherine, who spread the posters far and wide in our neighborhood. So thank you for doing all that. So you all would have received a little handout on your table. So please consider the actions on this handout. There's some easy actions you can do from home. When you can also come out to help us organize, join our committee. And we do invite you, as Brian said, to come on Saturday, May 25th to the Doors Open event, where we are going to share our message and make a statement that tech isn't something we should be celebrating, it's something we should be shutting down.
What time again?
Between 12 and 2.
What time are you going?
12 and, the event's from 10 to 4, we will be there with the presents from 12 to 2. So hopefully you can join us there. We also have a little donation box at the back. If you'd like to help cover our costs for tonight, that would be appreciated. Take home a lawn sign, but most importantly, please share what you learned tonight with your friends, family, and neighbors, and let them know about TERRE and our campaign to phase out the gas plant. I think our new campaign slogan is PEC 2.0, shut it down. So thank you so much for being here, and have a good evening, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you.